Hi, welcome to YTV and this week's segment of Everybody Has a Story. We're very excited to be joined this week by Vinca LaFleur, who is a former speechwriter for President Bill Clinton. She worked for 3 years as a foreign policy speechwriter and a special assistant for national security affairs in the administration, and she currently works as a partner for the private speechwriting firm in Washington D.C, West Wing Writers. Vinca, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So, speechwriting, this is a very unique job in politics. It's a small world. How did you stumble into this?
So I fell into it by accident. The career found me. And the story is actually one that I like to tell because it began with an epic fail. I had wanted to be a diplomat. That was my life stream. I was a French major at Yale. Went straight from Yale to SAIS, which is Johns Hopkins School of Foreign Policy, International Relations. And the second year of my master's program, I took the Foreign Service exam. And the way that it was offered back then was you took a standardized test in December. If you passed that, you were invited to take what they called an oral exam in the spring. And then you would find out at some point over the summer whether or not you had been accepted into the Foreign Service. And so I went through this process, and as I was waiting to get my scores back, I had an unpaid internship in Washington for Foreign Policy magazine, and all my friends were leaving town, and my lease was running out, and I was waiting to hear the news. And the envelope finally did come, and to my utter shock and dismay, I had failed the Foreign Service exam. But not only that, they had ranked me very high in what they called administrative ability, which at 24 I had none of. And they had ranked me very low in cross-cultural sensitivity and writing, which at 24 were the only two things I was pretty sure I was good at. So I really, I went into a tailspin. I had no plan B, and I frantically started informational interviewing in Washington. I was temping to make money to pay the rent. I called my mom, who came down for the weekend to try and buck me up. And I ended up on Capitol Hill as a legislative correspondent, which basically means I answered the mail, on foreign policy for Paul Simon, who was a liberal Democrat from Illinois, senator. He was on the Foreign Relations Committee, and he had run for president in the late 80s. And I'm from New Jersey. I'm from Princeton, New Jersey, but I very much admired and looked up to Senator Simon, and I was grateful to have a job. And I spent a year in that position, and during that year, this was sort of the end of 1989, 1990, the Berlin Wall had come down in Europe, and things were changing very fast in Eastern Europe. And one of the things that was revealed in that time was that there was this terrible situation in orphanages in Romania. And there were a lot of American families that wanted to help. They wanted to adopt Romanian babies or help in some way. Nobody knew anything about this issue, and I sort of picked it up for the office. And in the course of doing that, I heard about another job on the Hill for a small agency called the Helsinki Commission, to be the Romania analyst and also the Hungary and Germany analyst for the Helsinki Commission. So I took that job, and I spent 4 amazing years there in a very exciting time, just sort of in the history of Europe. I got to do a lot of election observing, traveling, writing. And it was during that period that President Clinton won his first term. And halfway through his first administration, I heard that Warren Christopher, who was Secretary of State, was looking for a speechwriter. And I applied for that job, and I got that job. So the chronology is that 5 years after I failed the Foreign Service exam because I couldn't write, I became the speechwriter for the Secretary of State, spent a year there, went to the White House. And
Need some cross-cultural sensitivity to do that job, too.
I guess so.
Well, let's go into speechwriting in general. What, other than being a good writer, that's a very broad statement, but what really makes a good speechwriter beyond just being able to write?
Yeah, so it's a particular kind of writing, and one of the things about it is that you have to be very comfortable giving up your byline and understanding that whatever you're writing isn't really yours. It will be delivered by somebody else. It will belong to somebody else. It will be somebody else who gets the credit if it goes well, and somebody else's reputation will suffer if it goes badly. So it's not your speech, and I think being able to accept that is a big part of it. A lot of my colleagues over the years have come to speechwriting from journalism, and I think sometimes that's hard because these are brilliant writers who are very accustomed to having a byline. I never had that. Another thing about speechwriting is that a speech is meant to be delivered a speech will be heard in real time, experienced in real time, and so you're working with a limited amount of time. 20 minutes is probably the most any audience can absorb, and so we would think that would be no more than about 3,000 words. So how can you pack everything you want to say into something that compact and make it interesting and memorable and clear and easy to follow for an audience to get in real time, and not just to get, but actually to remember and to be able to repeat after the fact. What makes a speechwriter great? So on the writing side, a creativity, great with deadlines, and then just, I think, a broad-gauged curiosity. I think it really helps to be interested in a lot of things and to be a great researcher and to have good ideas about where you might go to find not just factual information, but to find great stories or examples or even poetry or pop cultural references to really lift your speeches.
Well, a lot of speechwriters are very young. You look at President Obama's staff of speechwriters, especially John Favreau, who has since left, but they're in their late 20s and 30s now. Why do you think that is? Is it mostly the hours and the commitment, or is it something to do with the inspiration that you have, that younger writers can be more inspirational about politics at that age?
I think that part of the reason, John, brilliant writer, incredibly young. So it is true that White House staff, White House speechwriters have been young, but I think John was exceptionally young. Part of it is that people are coming off campaigns often, and the demands of a campaign job do tend to attract younger people who don't have small children at home or whatever, who have the flexibility to be part of that kind of an operation and routine, and then move into the administration. And the reason that I left the White House was actually because I was pregnant with my first child, and I didn't feel like keeping that job was compatible. I knew I wanted to keep working, but I didn't feel like I could do that job and be the kind of parent that I wanted to be. I will say that even though I have known many, many brilliant young writers, and at our firm we've been fortunate to hire some brilliant young writers straight out of Yale, when I think about my own career, I think the single thing that has sort of improved my writing over the years has been getting older. It's been just perspective, and I don't think I could possibly have understood that or appreciated that when I was younger, but there is something that I just think perspective adds to the texture of writing, and to the resources from which you can draw.
Well, let's talk about your work in the Clinton administration. A lot of people know President Clinton as a very talented off-the-cuff speaker. Was that difficult when writing speeches for him? Would you have to account for him going off script?
It wasn't difficult, and in the foreign policy speeches, he tended to stick to the script more than in the domestic speeches, but he ad-libbed in those too. And we used to say, we thought of him as a jazz musician, that he would riff. There was always, you wanted to make sure you provided this very clear melody line, but he would riff, and almost invariably made it better. Came up with things you wish you had thought of. So in terms of accounting for ad-libbing, the time constraint is just one to always be mindful of. And I think of that even now, for anybody that I'm writing for. When you're given a fixed period of time, to make sure that you don't write more words than can be reasonably uttered in that period of time. You want to give people room to ad-lib, because I think it's important. A speech is a performance too, and you want to give people a little bit of room to feed off the room and to make adjustments in real time if they need to.
Is there a favorite speech that you worked on, or maybe you didn't work on, but it was part of an experience that you had at the administration?
I think for me the sort of signature moment, the proudest moment of my time there was President Clinton's first trip to Belfast as a sitting president, which was in November, sort of end of November, beginning of December 1995. And it was a really important and exciting moment in the peace process in Northern Ireland. There was a ceasefire that had held. George Mitchell had just been named sort of a negotiator to try and work with the two sides. The United States had granted Jerry Adams a visa, which had been very controversial, but had broken some log jams and so forth. Anyway, it looked like it was a moment when things might actually happen. And the president went to Belfast, and the way that the speeches were set up that day, I was going to write his two big speeches in Belfast. So there was a big policy speech in the morning, and there was a Christmas tree lighting in front of Belfast City Hall that night. And the policy speech was held on the factory floor of a plant called Mackey's, which built machinery to weave textiles. And so if you can imagine, I mean, this idea of, this textile machinery weaving fabric, it was symbolically, it was very much the kind of message that we wanted to bring about sort of knitting disparate peoples together. And this factory literally sat on the peace line, the line that divided the city, but it had a very progressive, enlightened general manager, and Protestants would walk in one door and Catholics would walk in the other in the morning, and they would meet on the factory floor. So this was this exciting location, meaningful moment. Bill Clinton, the President of the United States, arriving, and from the moment that the plane touched down in Northern Ireland, as the motorcade was driving into the city, there were people lined up along the road with flags waving, and we just kind of knew that it mattered that he was there. And he had gone over his draft on Air Force One as we were coming in, and he had made some changes to it, which I didn't know what he had changed. I didn't find out until after the fact what it was that he had put in. But he was happy with the draft, so I was happy. One of the things that we couldn't have anticipated, though, or that we didn't realize what it would be like until we were actually there. So the advance team had found 2 children to introduce the president. Wherever he went, we would try and have him introduced by what we called real people. And the real people in this case were these 2 young children, one Protestant, one Catholic. And they were there in their school uniforms, and they were each talking about what peace meant to them. And the first was a little boy who talked about peace meaning that he and his mates could play soccer in the street. Then the little girl went, and she was right out of Hollywood Central casting. She looked like a porcelain doll, just this beautiful, angelic little girl who got up, and she said that her first father had been killed during the Troubles. And now that there was the ceasefire and peace, she hoped that there would be peace for the children of Northern Ireland. She said about her father, it was the saddest day of her life. It was just this moment. I mean, the whole place was just silent. And after the kids spoke, President Clinton came out, and think about an ad lib. He just kind of looked out at the room and he said, I think those 2 little children just told us everything we need to know about why we're here today. It was just one of those moments where you felt like the stage had been perfectly set. And the speech did go well. And that night, then he left Belfast. He went to Derry and gave a speech in Derry. He came back for the Christmas tree lighting, and there were hundreds of thousands of people out in the street in front of Belfast City Hall. And Van Morrison was playing, and it was just this incredible moment. I think that there aren't many moments that you get to have where you feel like what you were a part of really mattered, that maybe some of the words that you helped to choose really mattered, and this was a case where I'd like to think they did.
Well, certainly a unique job in the White House, but you've now moved on from that, and you're a partner at West Wing Writers, which is a private speechwriting firm. Now, I know you can't talk about specific clients you've had at West Wing Writers, but can you address what the specific differences are when you're writing in public and government writing versus private?
Well, one of the things that's kind of nice about writing the way we're able to do it now is that when somebody has come to our firm looking for support with a speech, and by definition it means that they think it's important and they're willing to invest resources in it, they're taking it very seriously. And we're able to insist on a conversation with the speaker, with the CEO, on the front end of the speechwriting process, which is so important. And that's really essential in any kind of speechwriting relationship, but I think oftentimes it doesn't happen. Which is a shame, because it's best for everybody if you can get that input on the front end. It just makes it that much likelier that the first draft that goes to the speaker is going to be close to what he or she actually wants to say. And then that saves headaches and stress for everyone involved.
Now, the last question I just want to ask before we go to our speed round, we always end with a speed round of fun questions, is how much does a speechwriter end up having in terms of policy influence? Because a speechwriter is the person who is at the computer when that speech is being written, whether it's an inaugural speech or the State of the Union. How much policy influence does that speechwriter have?
Well, I will only speak for myself, and when I was in the Clinton administration, I was relatively young myself, and so was not, I had people above me who I was reporting to. So I would not pretend that I was making policy. I think the moment of the speech, This is when the policy is being delivered to the audience. At the same time, I do believe that when you are helping to choose the words with which that policy is articulated or explained or presented, or or sold, you're trying to persuade people that this is a good idea, that you play an important role, and that's one of the reasons why the job is so satisfying, including the way that we do it today. Not government policy necessarily, but ideas that are trying to gain traction in the marketplace.
We'll end with a quick speed round, so just short questions, short answers. So the first one, favorite speech of all time?
Oh,
You have to choose one.
Yeah, I can't choose one. It's too hard to answer truly favorite speech of all time, but I will say that one that is definitely worth watching is Bobby Kennedy's impromptu eulogy of Martin Luther King.
Number two, shortest time you've ever been given to write a speech?
Well, to write sort of a full length speech, probably a few hours.
Wow. Issue you most like writing about, whether it's at West Wing Writers or when you were in the Clinton administration, that you most enjoyed writing about?
Yeah, I don't. It's really hard to pick one, but I will say that at the moment, a lot of the clients that I'm working for are very interested in women's empowerment, and I'm very interested in that too.
And last one, orator you wish you could write for or could have written.
Oh man, these are hard questions. I mean, boy, there's so many brilliant speakers out there that I wish I could say, oh, I wish I'd written that speech. I can't answer that question. We all wish we were Ted Sorensen. We all wish we had his talent. Who do I wish I was writing for? I don't know. Sorry, I can't answer that one.
That's all right. Vinca LaFleur, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us for this segment of YTV. Special thanks to Jonathan Edwards College and the Yale International Relations Association for their help.